Good morning. Call this hearing to order. We want to thank everyone for being here. And over the past few years, this committee has focused its attention on an issue that's become increasingly important for small businesses, cybersecurity. In past hearings, we have learned that a cyber attack on a small business can have serious consequences, not only for the business itself, but for its customers and employees and business partners alike. We've heard from small business owners and cybersecurity experts and government officials, and there's no question that improving cybersecurity for America's small businesses should continue to be a top priority, especially for this committee. In today's global economy, small businesses are increasingly turning to foreign technology to remain competitive in the world marketplace. However, these same products and services also provide new opportunities for foreign cyber criminals to infiltrate small business information technology systems, allowing them to access sensitive and valuable information. A recent survey found that 81% of small businesses are concerned about a cyber attack, but only 63% have the most basic cybersecurity measures in place to combat such an attack. Cyber attacks pose a higher risk for small businesses since most do not have the means to hire specialized employees or pay the average $32,000 in damages should they be hit with a cyber attack. And cyber threats for small businesses are on the rise. This committee has also found that the federal government is stepping up its efforts to both prevent and mitigate cyber attacks by coordinating and distributing cybersecurity resources directly to small businesses. There is strong bipartisan support from both chambers of Congress and the President to increase American protection from foreign cyber attacks. However, small businesses are still hesitant to engage with the federal government. This is often due to uncertainty surrounding legal liabilities, concerns about privacy and data protection, and a number of other factors. Still, federal information sharing is crucial to ensuring that small businesses have every resource possible to combat cyber threats and the confidence they need to engage with the federal agencies tasked with protecting them. That's why the ranking member and I recently introduced H.R. 4668, the Small Business Advanced Cybersecurity Enhancements Act of 2017, to increase the defensive measures available for small businesses undergoing or concerned about a cyber attack, and to incentivize additional information sharing between the private sector and the federal government. This bipartisan legislation seeks to safeguard small business from cyber attacks in a few simple ways. First, the bill establishes Small Business Development Centers, SBDCs, as the primary liaison for federal information sharing for small businesses. This bill also ensures that small businesses that engage with SBDCs receive the same protections and exemptions provided by the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act. Further, this bill would ensure that any policies or rulemaking adopted by any federal agency as a result of federal information sharing does not unfairly burden small businesses. It would also expand liability protections for small businesses that engage with the federal government in good faith. Ultimately, this legislation removes the barriers many small business owners face when confronted with a cyber threat, encouraging them to work with the federal government, not fear it. As I mentioned before, many cyber threats towards small businesses come at the hands of foreign bad actors, sometimes foreign governments, in an attempt to undermine the United States national security and economy. In fact, the Department of Homeland Security recently published a public notice exposing a vulnerability in a notable security camera company. Hikvision, one of the top 5 largest manufacturers of security cameras worldwide, is 42% owned by the Chinese government. And in 2017, Department of Homeland Security learned that many of its cameras were able to be hacked and remotely controlled. While Hikvision has worked with DHS to remedy the flaw, the problem remains that many small businesses that do not engage with the government or DHS regularly, and that's probably the majority of them, may not be even aware of the security flaw. Had the problem gone unnoticed, many small businesses would not have known that they were vulnerable to attack. So we look forward to hearing from our witnesses here today to learn more about how the federal government is working to address these important problems, and further, what preventative measures small businesses can use to protect themselves from falling victim to cyber attacks. And I would now like to yield to the ranking member, Ms. Velasquez, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ever since Russia used cyber attacks to influence the outcome of our 2016 elections, cybersecurity has been thrust to the forefront of national discussions. In today's world, everything from electoral integrity to national security to private sector trade secrets are at risk of cyber exploitation. In recent years, cyber criminals have increasingly targeted small businesses. 40% of all cyber attacks are focused on companies with less than 500 employees. This may be because only 14% of small businesses reported having in place a plan for keeping their company cyber secure. Among the most prolific users of cyber attacks are Chinese and Russian companies. In particular, Chinese companies have been documented to target American small businesses in order to obtain backdoor access to trade secrets and national security information. As hackers and other bad actors, including foreign agents, continue to evolve their cyber attacks, strengthening the federal government's engagement with small firms is crucial. The agencies we will hear from today are on the forefront of that fight. The FBI, which is testifying today, has worked with the Small Business Administration to develop InfraGuard, a collaborative effort to conduct regional workshops to counsel small firms on cybersecurity. The Department of Homeland Security, which is also represented in our panel, has created a new effort requiring private companies pursuing government contracts to be held to the same standards as the awarding agency to strengthen cybersecurity. While the goal of this effort is laudable, we must ensure that small firms have the resources to meet new cybersecurity requirements. To this end, I'm proud to join the chairman on H.R. 4668, the Small Business Advanced Cybersecurity Enhancement Act of 2017. This bill will establish a central small business cybersecurity assistance unit coordinated by SBA and federal agencies, including DHS. Furthermore, the Act will create a regional small business cybersecurity assistance unit within each Small Business Development Center, or SBDC. This will help to bring much-needed hands-on cybersecurity training to small firms across the country. Today's hearing is an opportunity to learn more about the government efforts, specifically DHS and the SBI, to assist small businesses in the protection of themselves and the government's national security. So let me thank all of our witnesses for testifying today. I would like to especially acknowledge the men and women serving in all divisions of the FBI. We know that you will do extraordinary work under challenging circumstances and that your agency, unfortunately, sometimes comes under political fire. Now, more than ever, we need skilled, impartial professionals serving in the Bureau, and so we thank you for the work that you and your colleagues do. With that, let me thank all witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to today's hearing, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady yields back. And now I'd like to explain very briefly relative to our timing and things. And I would also say that if committee members have opening statements, they can please submit them for the record. And we operate under the 5-minute rule here. Basically, each of you gets 5 minutes to testify, and then we get 5 minutes to ask questions back and forth, Republican, Democrat. And there's a lighting system. The green light will be on for 4 minutes. The yellow light will be on for a minute to let you know it's getting time to wrap up, and then the red light will come on, and we'd hope you could stay within those parameters if possible. We'll give you a little leeway. I'd now like to introduce our distinguished panel here, small but very distinguished. Our first witness today is Mr. Howard Marshall. He has served as Deputy Assistant Director of the Cyber Intelligence Outreach and Support Branch at the FBI since August 2016. In this role, Mr. Marshall works to identify and defeat cyber threats targeting the United States through strategic partnerships and intelligence coordination. Mr. Marshall began his career with the FBI in 1997 and has held a variety of positions both inside and outside of the Cyber Division, and we thank you for being here today. And our second witness will be Mr. Richard Driggers. Mr. Driggers serves as the National Protection and Programs Directorate Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Office of Cybersecurity and Communications at the Department of Homeland Security. And if that's not the longest title that we've had in this committee ever, it's pretty close. And he's responsible for developing and implementing operational programs to strengthen the security of the nation's critical infrastructure. Mr. Driggers joined DHS in 2003 and most recently was the Principal Deputy Director for Operations for the National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center. He's also a former United States Air Force Combat Controller. We thank you very much for your service and for being here today, both you gentlemen. We appreciate it. Mr. Marshall, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Chabot, Ranking Member Velasquez, and members of the committee.
And if you wouldn't mind just pulling the mic a little closer and make it easier for the folks out there to hear. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation to provide remarks on the FBI's role in helping small businesses defend against cyber threats. We consider engagement with the private sector to be a significant factor in our mission to identify, pursue, and defeat nefarious cyber criminals and enemies of the United States. As the committee is well aware, the growing number and sophistication of cyber threats poses a critical risk to U.S. businesses, and the impact of a successful attack can be devastating to small businesses in particular. We continue to see an increase in the scale and scope of reporting on malicious cyber activity that can be measured by the amount of corporate data stolen or deleted, personally identifiable information compromised, or remediation costs incurred by U.S. victims. Some of the more prevalent or rising cyber threats to small businesses from both domestic and foreign cyber actors include business email compromise, ransomware, the criminal targeting of data, including customer data, financial data, or intellectual property, and the growing risk posed by vulnerabilities of IoT devices, Internet of Things. In light of these and other cyber threats to U.S. businesses, the FBI has made private sector engagement a key component of our strategy for combating cyber threats. Recognizing the ever-changing threat landscape, the FBI is enhancing the way it communicates with private industry. Traditionally, the Bureau has used information developed through its investigations, shared by intelligence community partners, or provided by other law enforcement agencies to understand the threat posed by nation-states and criminal actors. However, we're now also looking to integrate private industry information into our intelligence cycle to enhance our ability to identify, prioritize, and respond to both emerging and ongoing threats. Private industry has unique insight into their own networks and may have information as to why their company or their sector may be an attractive target for malicious cyber activity. Companies may also be able to share intelligence on the types of attempted attacks they experience. We believe it's important the FBI integrate this type of data into its own intelligence cycle. This type of information sharing enables us to provide more specific, actionable, and timely information to our industry partners so they can protect their systems in a proactive manner. The FBI disseminates information regarding specific threats to the private sector through various reporting mechanisms. Public service announcements published by the Internet Crime Complaint Center provide timely and practical information to U.S. businesses and individuals on the latest threats and scams. Private industry notifications, or PINs, offer contextual information about ongoing or emerging cyber threats, and FBI Liaison Alert System reports provide technical indicators gleaned through investigations or intelligence. These communication methods facilitate the sharing of information with a broad audience or specific sector and are intended to provide recipients with actionable intelligence to aid in victim notifications, threat neutralization, and other investigative efforts. The FBI also believes it is critical to maintain strong relationships with our private sector partners to allow for successful responses to cyber attacks. One example of an effective public-private relationship is the National Cyber Forensic and Training Alliance, a nonprofit 501c3 corporation focused on identifying, mitigating, and neutralizing cybercrime threats globally. Working hand-in-hand with private industry, law enforcement, and academia, the NCFTA's mission is to provide a neutral, trusted environment that enables two-way information sharing, collaboration, and training. The NCFTA works directly with 136 member organizations from the banking, retail, critical infrastructure, healthcare, and government sectors. Their analysts have real-time access to FBI agents, analysts, and the actionable intelligence they collect. The FBI Cyber Division regularly coordinates initiatives for engagement with private sector partners to prevent threats and ultimately close intel gaps. In recent years, we have launched public awareness campaigns or open houses to educate businesses on serious cyber threats. In 2016, the FBI collaborated with DHS, U.S. Secret Service, Department of Health and Human Services, and the National Council on Information Sharing and Analysis Centers to host conferences and workshops at FBI and Secret Service field offices across the country to educate businesses on the ransomware threat. The FBI and Secret Service jointly hosted these workshops in 14 key cities targeting small, medium, and large organizations. Over 5,700 individuals were briefed during this campaign. Similarly, in 2017, the FBI collaborated with DHS, Secret Service, and NCISACs to host workshops across the country on business email compromise. The Cyber Division engages directly with businesses in other ways as well. We host or participate in briefings, conferences, workshops, and other meetings providing strategic-level information to key executives throughout industry. These briefings include both classified and unclassified discussions regarding cyber threats. Over the past 5 years, the FBI Cyber Division has completed nearly 2,800 such engagements, not counting the many informal contacts and interactions we have with businesses in our field offices on a regular basis. When a small business has been victimized by cybercrime and reaches out to the FBI for assistance, we coordinate with the individual business to determine the best course of action to address the incident. The FBI's approach in working with potential or actual victims of cyber intrusions or attacks is to first and foremost, and to the best of our ability, use our processes to protect the victim from being re-victimized. We at the FBI appreciate the committee's efforts in making cyber threats to small businesses a focus and to committing to improving how we can work together to better defend U.S. businesses from cyber adversaries. We thank you for the opportunity to speak about our cyber outreach efforts. We look forward to discussing these issues in greater detail and answering any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Mr. Driggers, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Chabot, Ranking Member Velasquez, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the ongoing efforts to enhance the cybersecurity of America's small businesses. The Department of Homeland Security serves a critical role in safeguarding and securing cyberspace, which is a core Homeland Security mission. At DHS, we assist with protecting civilian federal government networks, share information related to cybersecurity risks and incidents, and provide technical assistance to federal agencies, as well as state and local governments, international partners, and the private sector. The Department of Homeland Security, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the Small Business Administration and other interagency partners play a crucial role in helping small businesses identify and mitigate cybersecurity risks. Cyber threats remain one of the most significant strategic risks for the United States, threatening the national security, economic prosperity, and public health and safety. Global cyber events or incidents such as WannaCry ransomware incident last May and the NotPetya malware incident in June are examples of malicious actors leveraging cyberspace to create disruptive effects and cause economic loss. We've also seen advanced persistent threat actors target small businesses to leverage their infrastructure and their relationships with larger businesses to gain access to networks of major and high-value assets that operate components of the nation's critical infrastructure. DHS has confidence that these threat actors are actively pursuing their ultimate long-term campaign goals, and DHS and the FBI remain ever vigilant and active with incident response and have published multiple joint technical alerts to enable network defenders to identify and take action to reduce exposure to malicious activity. These incidents remind us that small businesses play a key role in ensuring the security, reliability, and resilience of the nation's critical infrastructure, and that small businesses can be easy targets across a complex attack surface. This is especially evident when analyzing cyber risks to many of our nation's supply chains. Critical infrastructure assets can be small businesses themselves or may be dependent on small businesses to provide essential services or materials. It is essential that small businesses implement common cybersecurity standards and practices to protect themselves and their customers. Small businesses face the same threats as large businesses, but do not necessarily have access to the same resources. DHS is working with our interagency partners to close this gap for cybersecurity information sharing, training, as well as resources. As the committee knows, DHS and the U.S. Small Business Administration have partnered to develop a strategy to help small and medium-sized businesses enhance their cybersecurity planning and risk management efforts. Small businesses are diverse in size and complexity with varying needs for improving their cybersecurity posture. Because of this, it is imperative that we work with small business development centers across the country, as well as other information sharing organizations. The federal government offers a suite of services and capabilities that can help small businesses improve their cybersecurity. For some, it may be simple training on cybersecurity best practices or the implementation of basic cyber hygiene. For others, it may be performing complex vulnerability assessments to understand appropriate mitigation steps based on their specific risk profile. DHS offers a range of services to meet these needs and continues to pursue new opportunities to provide assistance. In developing the Small Business Cybersecurity Strategy with the Small Business Administration, we have identified over 40 federal programs or initiatives that are helpful in assisting small businesses raise awareness of their cybersecurity posture. Some programs were created specifically for small businesses, while others provide assistance across a broader business community. As our nation continues to evolve and new threats emerge, we must not only develop more effective methods to protect our information systems, but also find more cost-effective and efficient ways to increase public awareness and access to cybersecurity resources. The Cybersecurity Act of 2015 established DHS as the federal government's central hub for the automated sharing of cyber threat indicators and defensive measures. Automated indicator sharing is part of the department's efforts to create an ecosystem in which, as soon as a company or federal agency observes malicious activity, the indicator associated with that activity can be shared in real time at machine speed with all of our partners that are leveraging DHS's automated indicator sharing service. This real-time sharing capability can limit the scalability of many attacks and thereby increasing the cost for the adversaries, as well as reducing the impact of malicious cyber activity. The automated indicator sharing service is a relatively new capability, and we expect the volume of threat indicators shared through this system to substantially increase as technical standards, software, and hardware supporting the system continues to be refined and more businesses sign up. This approach to collective defense helps ensure that small and medium-sized businesses are protected against the best cyber defense, are protected using the best cyber defense available information. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, and I'll now recognize myself to open the questions, and Mr. Driggers, I'll start with you. And I'd like to begin with the Hikvision matter, and first of all, it's my understanding that the Chinese government owned at least 40% of the company, and maybe up to 42 was the figure we've been getting. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what I've seen in reporting as well, sir.
Okay, thank you. And as I mentioned in my opening statement, there's a real concern regarding vulnerabilities in some of Hikvision's security cameras. I understand that the weakness made cameras remotely exploitable. And I also understand that when DHS became aware of the security exposure, there was an advisory notice from DHS's Cyber Emergency Response Team, and that Hikvision worked with DHS to fix the problem. My question is this: is it likely that some small businesses could still be susceptible to this cybersecurity flaw, and how is DHS working to inform small businesses that they could be exposed to this risk?
So we have we publish our alerts on the USCERT website, so that's open to the web, so anybody can access those. With regards to this particular flaw, we did work with a research community. We discovered the vulnerability. We worked with the company, and they put out a software update that mitigated the impacts of this particular exploitation. That's kind of standard practice that we do at the Department of Homeland Security across many different companies, devices, and software, working to understand what vulnerabilities exist and working with the companies to publish updates to their software so that we can close down and mitigate vulnerabilities. Certainly, if there are small businesses that are using devices and they're not patching those systems or updating the software, they could be exposed to the vulnerability if they haven't covered down on that particular update.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Marshall, how do you determine whether a cyber attack on a small business warrants FBI intervention? Is there a monetary loss threshold or some other indicator to assess an appropriate level of response and or dedication of resources from the FBI?
Sure, there's no hard and fast rule, Mr. Chairman. Generally, there are a number of variables we'll look at. It depends on the field office that has jurisdiction over the particular attack. It depends on the prosecutorial discretion of the U.S. Attorney's Office. Certainly, we're not going to dedicate resources to something that may not be prosecuted. The loss amount is certainly one of those things we would consider, and it's a variable in terms of, say, a $100,000 loss in New York City may not draw our attention or resources, may not get prosecuted, but a $100,000 loss in Louisville, Kentucky likely will. So there are a number of different factors. We'd also look at the attack vector, and if there was any interest, we still maintain our counterintelligence authorities and interests. We may look at it even though the loss amount is low and maybe it's not going to get prosecuted as a crime. But there are a number of different variables that would lead someone to make that determination.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Driggers, let me go back to you. Does the Department of Homeland Security or the FBI, for that matter, leverage the small business development centers to assist small businesses in identifying and mitigating cybersecurity risks? And how effective has that partnership been if you do that?
So we certainly work with, many different information sharing organizations, the Small Business Development Centers being one of those. Whether or not the Small Business Development Center itself has the technical acumen and the subject matter expertise to actually assist us with a particular support that we're providing a small business. That depends, but we certainly, I don't want to say 100% of the time we work through the Small Business Development Center, but if the small business is engaged with the Small Business Development Center and that's the way that they want to engage the government, we would certainly go that route.
Okay, thank you. And I've got time for about one more question, so I'll go back to you, Mr. Marshall. What steps are being taken by the FBI and also by DHS to guarantee that small businesses' personal information and IT data is protected? Are there any efforts to ensure that their information can't be used, against them in the future by some bad actors?
Well, certainly we would treat any information that we would come across through the course of investigation as evidence, and so it would absolutely get that protection from us. Our first and foremost responsibility when we respond to a scene is to pursue a criminal investigation. So we're not interested in collaborating necessarily with any regulatory agency. Certainly, we don't disseminate it to anyone else not directly involved in the investigation.
Okay. My time's expired, but let me just go back real quick. I assume DHS has policies in place to make sure that their personal information that they have is protected, so it's not getting into the wrong hands. Is that correct, Mr. Director?
That is correct. We have a couple different information sharing handling caveats that we use or handling processes that we use. We use the traffic light protocol, which is an international standard for safeguarding information. And we also use our liability coverage protections that we got with the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act of 2015.
Okay. Thank you. I thank both of you. My time's expired. The rank member is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to address this question to both of you. Based on your knowledge of and interaction with small firms, what is your opinion of the general state of small business cybersecurity? And is the federal government doing enough to help them and your agencies to improve it?
I would tell you that they're underprepared. Even in the biggest firms, cybersecurity is oftentimes considered a cost center. And there's the general thought process is that it's not necessarily the cost of doing business. So even in your bigger firms, cybersecurity is usually not something that's being considered. So as you go down the pecking order in terms of size, when it comes to business ventures, when you get down to small businesses, I would tell you they're underprepared.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
I would agree with Mr. Marshall. I would also say that each individual business needs to take a look at their risk profile. Not all businesses need the same cybersecurity posture. Cybersecurity mitigation and systems can be extremely costly. So, depending on what type of small business you are, the type of data you're holding, the services, whether you belong to a critical supply chain, you need to look at all of those factors in determining what types of cybersecurity mitigation steps you need to be put in place.
Thank you. Mr. Marshall, Information sharing between the government and the private sector is critical to reducing national security breaches and cybercrime against Americans. Can you tell us how preventive information sharing is more effective for small firms from solely a cost perspective, and how it assists the FBI in its role fighting cyber attacks?
So to Mr. Drigger's point, not everybody has the same set of concerns. Not everybody has established or created a security posture that's forward-leaning enough. So the hope is that the information we provide to them, whether it's indicators of compromise or general awareness message about good cyber hygiene, the hope is that they can drill down and focus and spend whatever resources they're willing to commit to cybersecurity on those things. If we can provide them with IP addresses that they can block at their firewall, that's certainly more than what they would have had we not provided information of that nature. We think it's absolutely critical to get the message out as far and wide as possible. On the prevention side, certainly, the fewer of these we have to investigate, the better, obviously. But the more information we can provide, the better. And we do tend to try to over-communicate. Certainly, there are things that can't be released because they're classified, either because of the way they were collected or what they're telling us about the adversary. But to the degree that we can declassify and push that information out, we do, and we do it as quickly as possible.
So, Mr. Driggers, we have 28 million small businesses in our country, and knowledge is power. Yep. So if they are not aware of the threats in terms of cybersecurity attacks, they will not take any preventive measures. So how can the federal government work in a way that raise awareness, especially for those small contractors that are doing business within the federal marketplace?
So I think that, information sharing really underpins all the services and capabilities that we have at DHS with our cybersecurity programs. It is foundational to getting as much information out as we can, whether that's highly technical data and providing some context around that, or whether it's threat information or things like that, getting stuff declassified as much as we possibly can, whether that's sharing machine to machine or just putting stuff out on our website or working with the FBI or these other information sharing organizations such as the ISACs and the ISAOs, Small Business Development Centers. We also obviously work very closely under the National Infrastructure Protection Partnership model with the Sector Coordinating Councils. And so I think it's important to raise the awareness. We certainly need to do that. We need to use all available resources to do that and to get the information out as much as we possibly can. Those organizations or those small businesses that are part of the supply chain, we are certainly sharing information with those individuals. Awareness is an issue. One of the objectives that you'll see when we publish the small business strategy is a consolidation of resources and dedicated resources to do this outreach to the small business community to make sure that they understand what programs are available to assist them with their cybersecurity posture.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Comer, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first question for either witness, can you all walk me through your agency's protocol for responding to cyber threat indicators or reports of a cyber attack from a small business? In other words, what information do you need and how do you get the information?
Sure. So we would get the information to our field offices one of two ways. Hopefully, there's an ongoing established relationship with the victim. Either they're a member of InfraGard or some other group that has allowed us to create that relationship. If not, they tend to go through IC3 and report it there, and then it's pushed to the appropriate field office. We would then have probably the cyber program coordinator in that field office make an assessment of what was written and then make contact. Depending upon the size of the breach, what was reported initially. If it's big enough, there would be probably coordination at the federal level here in Washington, D.C., but with field offices in 56 different locations, that would generically be how it would come to us. Then we would make an assessment, probably through a phone call with the victim or somebody representing the victim, whether or not to send resources and actually start opening investigation and start that process.
Many small businesses do not have preventive procedures in place to thwart a cyber attack before it happens. What do you suggest small businesses do to safeguard themselves against potential threats?
Well, there are a number of things they can do, and I would suspect the best thing they could do is elevate the necessity for cybersecurity within their own organizations. Hire capable, competent people to help protect data. Create a culture within the organization that promotes security. It's got to be something you do every day. It can't be done after the fact. So that would be my advice, is they need to be thinking about it on the front end.
Yeah, I think there's some basic things that really all businesses can do. And some of these basic things individuals can do at home as well. The bottom line is that an adversary is going to use the least cost tactic to get into a network. And so anytime you can raise your security posture by doing simple basic things, they're going to bypass you and move on to the next target that may be more available so that they don't have to spend as many resources. Certainly backing up critical data is important for small businesses, particularly those that are holding a lot of sensitive personal information about their customers. Protecting their mobile devices, making sure that there's the ability to track, lock, as well as wipe any device that could be stolen or lost. Protecting your organization against malware by making sure that you have a good patching schedule for software updates. A lot of companies that produce software and produce devices on a regular basis also produce security updates or software updates to those. And so it's important that you take advantage of that and you update your software, as well as protecting your data with passwords, two-factor authentication, changing default passwords on devices. These default passwords are available on the web, so it's important when you buy a new device that you change the default passwords on those. And I think some simple training for your employees about phishing attacks and the fact that those exist. That's a very low-tech, easy way for adversaries to get into networks. So doing that training for your employees is pretty low cost, and I think there's training available on the web for that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Norman, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I live in a rural district, a lot of small businesses. What would you say that the FBI, DHS could do to, avert the threat that they have? And secondly, to get people to talk about it. A lot of these firms will not talk about it because it's, for whatever reason, it's embarrassing. How would you respond, either Mr. Driggers or Mr. Marshall, how would you respond to that?
Well, I think with regards to talking about it, I mean, that's an issue. Talking about it publicly could be an issue for a particular company, but what we want them to do is call the FBI or call the Department of Homeland Security, the National Cybersecurity Communications Integration Center, so that we can take the steps necessary to help mitigate whatever incident happened, so that we can provide assistance to the impacted victim, and I think even more importantly, learn what happened, develop analysis and develop indicators so that we can share that more broadly, so that other cyber network defenders can take advantage of the information. That said, when we do that, we anonymize the information, we protect the identity of the victim through those information sharing protocols that I talked about earlier.
I would further that by saying they maybe a better understanding of the fact that when you're a victim, we're going to continue to treat you as a victim. This isn't a gotcha game. This isn't a, hey, we're going to run and tell a regulator or a state regulator that you weren't properly prepared or defensed against these types of attacks. I understand the stigma to a degree, because who wants to do business with someone that can't protect their data? And you see that in small firms and you see it in big firms too. But what it will take to get over that stigma, I'm not entirely sure. We push the message repeatedly that, to Mr. Drigger's point, please call us. We certainly can't do anything if we're not aware of it. But beyond that, pushing the message of better cybersecurity is probably all we can do.
Yep.
What is your opinion? DHS oversees the National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center, and which basically encourages the public and private sectors to swap information. Is this reliable? Is it worth the money? What is your take on that?
So it's absolutely reliable, and it's allowed us to, quite frankly, thwart many attacks through the analysis that we have done and the indicator sharing that we have pushed out, either through our automated indicator sharing system, which, as I said in my opening statement, is machine-to-machine, near real-time, as well as just publishing technical alerts with the technical information in there so that cyber network defenders can also take advantage of that aren't necessarily leveraging that automated system. A lot of these technical alerts are the analysis is done at the National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center, but it's representative of whole of government. So there's a lot of different interagency partners that are there to include the intelligence community as well as the FBI.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Lawson, who's the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Health and Technology, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to the committee. And you all may already be aware of H.R. 4668 that introduced by the chair here. Can you describe what challenges exist in the cybersecurity sphere as it relates to small business, and how this bill may help to alleviate those challenges?
I certainly think the focus on small businesses, and quite frankly appreciate the committee and the chairman's focus on small businesses, particularly with regard to their cybersecurity. I think that putting more focus, making sure that we are attentive to the small business community and make sure that they are aware that there are resources that exist in the federal government that can help them and assist them with their cybersecurity activities and posture, that there are organizations like the 56 field offices that Mr. Marshall talked about, as well as the National Communications and or the National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center, that those organizations exist to provide assistance, to protect your information, to protect your identity. But the bottom line is we exist to support your efforts. That said, we also want to work with the various different information sharing organizations that are existing. The private sector has self-organized to create information sharing and analysis centers, information sharing and analysis organizations, and small business development centers, and we want to certainly work with them and through them to make sure that we are raising awareness about the various different programs that the federal government has to offer.
Okay, Mr. Marshall, did you want to comment?
Anything that promotes cybersecurity would be beneficial. I referenced the NCFTA in my opening remarks. That was opened. The original was opened in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, several years ago. It was wildly successful. It includes some smaller businesses, but we're expanding into New York. We're expanding into Los Angeles, and that model is one that we think is very effective.
Okay, when the question was asked earlier about small businesses in rural areas, how can these really small businesses, I have a lot of rural areas back in my district, what incentives can you give to these mom and pop operations to really share cybersecurity data, and what do they get? What kind of cybersecurity will they inherit? They're just those small-time operations.
Hopefully what they get is, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, what they get are indicators of compromise and things that they can do quickly, cheaply, and effectively to try to stop some of the potential attacks against them. I don't know that they give up much more than their time to participate in things like InfraGard or even the business email compromise open houses or the ransomware open houses. What they get is a better understanding of how the threat impacts them. A lot of these small businesses don't even know what business email compromise is. They probably don't know what phishing is. They probably don't know what ransomware is. So just the hour that it would take to attend a meeting at an FBI field office or Secret Service field office to better understand the threat and get those things, as Mr. Driggers referred to, those things that will help them focus what they can invest on cybersecurity, they can really drill down and make sure that they're doing that very well. It won't stop everything, but to the point made earlier, if it makes you a less attractive target, then it's worth its investment in time.
The incentives that you, Mr. Drigger, is in that you might use is that they will grasp anything that they think is going to be harmful to their business operation. So, how do you approach them?
Well, we approach them with the protections that we afford them, that we were given the authority for to offer liability protections for information that they share with us. And I will tell you that just from a cultural perspective within DHS, particularly within the National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center that we call the NCIC, you know, the protecting the identity of a victim underpins all the services and the programs and the information sharing protocols that we have. So, you know, you can rest assured if you're going to share information with the NCIC that we're going to protect the identity of you. So there's a protection there as well as a liability protection. But to Mr. Marshall's point, just raising awareness, understanding that these types of threats are out there, these types of risks are out there, and doing some of the basic, very low-cost things that I kind of laid out before with regards to patching your networks, training your staff on email or on phishing attacks, you know, making sure that you have a simple policy in place that, you know, if there's a network email password that, you know, one employee has one password, that type of a thing, so you don't share passwords.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady from American Samoa, Ms. Broadwagon, who's the chairman of the Subcommittee on Health and Technology, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Talofa, and good morning, and I want to thank the chairman for holding this hearing on this important issue. As the chairman of the Health and Technology Subcommittee, cybersecurity is something I care about deeply. And I want to thank you, Mr. Marshall and Mr. Driggers, for testifying before us today. Now, you gentlemen have already answered my first question, and I thank you for that. My second issue is with foreign cyber threats. Especially the Chinese are out in our neck of the woods. The Chinese are making massive inroads with my neighbors in the South Pacific. And Mr. Marshall, what steps is the FBI taking to safeguard against sophisticated state-backed cyber attackers? Furthermore, and this may be outside of the scope of this hearing, is there any technical assistance the United States may be able to provide for my neighbors who do not have the ability to counter these threats?
I'm not quite sure exactly which neighbors you're referring to. We get a tremendous amount of assistance from the NSA. From the agency. We certainly partner regularly with DHS, but we have a tremendous amount of technical assistance that helps us identify those threats and assess their intelligence value, and then come up with a comprehensive strategy to either mitigate them or monitor them.
My home district is American Samoa, as you may know, and so my neighbors are the independent nation of Samoa, Fiji, Tonga, and that part of the Pacific.
We have a very good friend not that far away in Australia, and we do a lot of collaborative work with our Five Eye partners, of which they're one.
Thank you very much. I yield back balance of my time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Blum, who is chairman of Subcommittee on Agriculture, Energy, and Trade, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Shabbat, and thank you to our panelists today for being here. First question, kind of broad, I know, but how bad is this problem? I'm a small businessman. I go back to my district and I talk to small business people every week. And I can say, oh, hey, cyber hacking, it's a problem. It's a big deal. I don't think they really believe me. I mean, how bad is this problem? How can we quantify this? Is it getting better, getting worse?
Well, it's definitely getting worse.
As evidenced by what?
It's bad and getting worse. The number of cases that are referred for investigation, the number of attacks that are thwarted that we know that have been prevented, all of these numbers indicate a rise.
A rise, is a 2% rise? It has doubled? What kind of an increase are we talking about?
So if you wanted to narrow the question just a little bit further to look at something like business email compromise or ransomware, We're talking about, in the neighborhood of 40, 50% growth year over year. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. Now, our hope is certainly that we can begin to do things as technology evolves and gives us other investigative opportunities that maybe we can figure out with the private sector how to maybe tamp some of these down. And indeed, I think that's happening. The
Is
problem,
organized crime involved in this at all?
certainly they're involved in it. I'd say there are organized criminals around the world that have figured out how to branch into the cyberspace.
Well, I guess I don't mean organized criminals. I mean organized crime as in the mafia and drug cartels and organizations like
Yes.
that.
And you would be surprised at the areas in which they're looking. You mentioned drug cartels. If you were able to penetrate someone's air traffic system to determine or identify U.S. surveillance planes, would you be better or worse off? Things of that nature, places where you wouldn't normally expect to see.
You bring that up. I fly 130 times a year, so I do care. I assume our air traffic control system is unbelievably secure. Not that it couldn't happen, but
It is, but it is not the only technology out there that helps monitor what's in the sky. So there are, and I use that just as an example. Can you monitor activity along the border? This may be a question better for you than for me. Through intruding on somebody's network, yes, you probably can. Would that be information that a drug cartel would be interested in? Sure, it would. So the answer to your question is yes.
or some of these. I assume some of these operations are relatively sophisticated.
Yes.
And maybe this would be a question for you, Mr. Driggers, Homeland Security. Are more of the cyber hackers domestic, or are they foreign? And are they individuals, or are they countries?
So I don't have the specific details as to whether they're foreign or domestic, or whether they're individuals or they're nation states. Certainly, we can make the assumption that all of those categories of adversary are working hard every day. They're certainly getting more sophisticated and they're getting more persistent. We've seen that over the past at least 3 or 4 years. But I also want to preface, particularly with the small business, it doesn't take sophistication to exploit a vulnerability in a small business. And I think all small businesses need to assume that they have some type of vulnerability that exists within their networks or the devices that they're using. And so it's really important that, because a lot of small businesses don't have the resources to really put in place very sophisticated cyber defense mechanisms, but they do have the resources to do the low-cost things that I talked about, and I think that should be the focus and the awareness that we're talking about. We need to make sure that they are doing the basics with regards to cybersecurity, hygiene, training their staff, and that they know who to call if there is a particular issue.
I've often heard that warfare of the future will not be about bullets and bombs, it'll be about bits and bytes. So this is a war. Are we winning the war, or are we losing the war?
As it pertains to the general public becoming more cybersecurity aware, I'd say we're losing. Again, security is one of the last things people consider, whether you're a small businessman or whether you're pulling out a laptop out of its box for the first time when you set it up at home. These are just not things that we have been trained to think about. So in that regards, I'd say we're probably losing.
Mr. Driggers, winning the war or losing the war?
So I'll answer the same way Mr. Marshall did. I think if we look at the large businesses, particularly those that are designated as nationally critical infrastructure, and those from a risk profile that the Department of Homeland Security on a day-to-day basis interacts with, I think that they've certainly raised their game. But I think that there is a huge chasm between those individual businesses and the ones that are medium and small size.
Thank you, gentlemen. And I yield back the time I don't have.
Okay, gentleman yields
you.
back, and I just have one final question. When we've been discussing malware, just for those that may be watching at home or may see the transcript of this or whatever, we're essentially talking about your computer, your files, photographs, documents being seized by some criminal element or blackmailer or something that says, you know, I got them now, I'm not releasing this, I'm not going to let you have access to your own computer unless you pay me X amount of money within a certain amount of time. And I guess that can happen to individuals on their home computer, or this is a small business committee, so we're obviously most directly trying to help small businesses across the country. It can happen to anybody, but that's what we're talking about, correct? And I see you're both nodding. If that should happen to a citizen or a small business, what should he or she do at that point? And either one of you or both of you would like to.
So the Bureau does not have an official position. What you're referring to is ransomware. The Bureau does not have an official position as to whether or not a victim of ransomware should in fact pay the ransom in order to get their data back. You know, we've discussed a couple times that the important thing is to back up your data consistently. So when this happens, you can just ignore the request for ransom. One of the things we'd ask victims to consider is the fact that, one, they're being attacked by a criminal. So the promise of returning your data after payment should be considered by the person making the demand. The other thing is a lot of the malware variants now are locking data permanently. And there is no, you can pay a ransom, you can pay 100 times the ransom. There's no technical way to unlock your data. So there's no formal advice. Different companies, big and small, have different types of responses to this. But we would ask that people consider the fact that a criminal is the one that's making the demand.
And I misspoke. I meant to say ransomware when I said malware, but it's a form of that. Mr. Driggers, anything?
Yeah, I would agree with Mr. Marshall.
Thank you.
We don't necessarily have an official position. The individual business needs to make their own risk determination as to whether or not what action they take in terms of response to some type of ransomware attack.
Thank you very much. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Espaillat, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Marshall, the FBI's cyber division addresses a wide variety of issues, including non-traditional forms of cyber crimes. What is the most common form of cyber attack your division encounters, and is it different from small business complaints that you process on a regular basis? Are businesses coming forward as well?
Sure. I would tell you the most frequent attack vector is spear phishing. It happens repeatedly over and over and over again, and we've talked about the amount of money it costs to have good cybersecurity and cyber hygiene. The bottom line is, if somebody can send out 10 million emails, it just takes one employee not paying attention to click on it to thwart your multi-million-dollar investment in cybersecurity. I won't go down the laundry list of breaches that we've had in the last year. But I think a lot of them have that component in common, that they're, and I don't have an exact number for you, but a vast majority of them are through a spearfish campaign.
Okay. And Mr. Driggers, the Obama administration made efforts to increase cybersecurity by creating a federal privacy panel and creating sanctions to block those that pose a significant threat. How are these efforts beneficial to small businesses, and what more remains to be done in this particular area?
Congressman, I don't have a lot of details on the panel. I can certainly take that back and get the information and respond to you.
And finally, I'll ask both of you. I've had several discussions with experts regarding cybersecurity in general. And they've told me that basically, if somebody wants to hack you, right, if they really intent on doing this, there's just basically very little we can do about it. They can penetrate eventually at some point or other. Is that the case, or are we at the mercy of these hackers? And is there anything we can do to prevent it? I mean, America should not be at the mercy of folks that may have an intent to do something and it cannot be stopped. Is there anything that we can do to stop this?
If the question is there a magic bullet or a silver bullet that'll put an end to this, the answer is no. There are things that you can do, an escalating series of things you can do to try to avoid becoming a victim. Everything from simple awareness and then a don't click this email campaign, all the way up to the most sophisticated technical advanced technical protections and defenses that include encryption and routine backups. If it depends upon what kind of money you're willing to spend. But I don't believe that there's a magic bullet that will just make this problem go away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield my time.
Thank you. Gentleman yields back. As the hearing comes to a close, we want to again thank our witnesses here this morning for, and now right after this afternoon as well, for being here and going over one of the topics that this committee considers to be one of the chief challenges that small businesses face across the country. And we appreciate the information that you've given us. And we also appreciate, the chair appreciates working with the ranking member on legislation, H.R. 4668, and as it moves forward. And I would ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting materials for the record without objection so ordered. And if there's no further business to come before the committee, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.
Not here. He did a good job. Oh, yeah, he's never tested. He did a good job.
It's a Chinese.